One, live.
Good evening. Hello and welcome to this meeting of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign. It's titled Solidarity and Resistance, Cuba's 60 Years of Inspiring Internationalism. My name is Rob Miller. I'm the director of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign here in the UK, and I'll be chairing the meeting tonight. We've got four fabulous speakers tonight, and hopefully we'll have a few moments for questions at the end, but we do aim to finish by 8 o'clock tonight at the latest. Just before we start, I'll explain a few technical details and why we're running the meeting like this, which is very important. As well as our guest speakers, we have that you see on the screens. You may also see Ryan from the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, who is hosting this meeting on Jitsi. So if there are any technical issues, he may appear on your screen, but hopefully it should all work smoothly tonight. We're live streaming this meeting from Jitsi to YouTube, so that our special guest from Cuba, Fernando González, is able to join us live this evening, and also that people in Cuba are able to watch and participate on YouTube. Unfortunately, because of the United States blockade of Cuba, Cubans and the Cuban people are unable to access Zoom. They are blockaded from accessing Zoom, as they are other international applications. So they have to find other ways to run live meetings like this. So I'd like to welcome our speakers and everyone tonight watching on YouTube. For those of you who are not familiar with the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, we're a UK organisation that campaigns for an end to the illegal US blockade of Cuba, which has been going on for almost 60 years. We're broad-based, we have over 5,000 members, affiliated organisations, trade unions, CLPs and so on. And together we lobby members of Parliament, the British government. We organise solidarity brigades to Cuba, but also speaking tours back to the UK. And we work to share and build links between Britain and Cuba, as well as better understanding between our nations. As well as campaigning on the blockade, we run speaking tours, public meetings, cultural events. We sell lots of items, produce a quarterly magazine, and raise funds for projects in Cuba and relief work following hurricanes, tornadoes, and so on. Most recently, we have just raised over £30,000 to buy much needed PPE and ventilators and equipment such as that to help Cuba fight the coronavirus pandemic at home. Talking of solidarity work and campaigning, it really is a wonderful honour to welcome our first guest, Fernando González. If you have been involved with the Cuba Solidarity Campaign for any amount of time, you'll know that Fernando is one of the Miami Five. And for those of you who are new to the campaign, the Miami Five were 5 Cubans who went to Miami in the USA in the 1990s to infiltrate terrorist organizations that were carrying out attacks against Cuba. The 5 collected information about these groups, which the Cuban government passed on to the FBI and the US authorities. However, rather than arrest the terrorists, the United States government arrested the Miami Five and gave them terrible, harsh sentences, right up to double life. The Cuba Solidarity Campaign was part of an international campaign alongside British trade unions, many other people, for campaigning for their freedom. But Fernando himself served 15 years in US jails before being released and returned back to Cuba. Today, Fernando is a member of Parliament. He's also the president of ICAP, the Cuban Friendship Organization, which works to coordinate and works with organizations like Cuba Solidarity Campaign around the world. ICAP itself is this year celebrating 60 years of its founding, and it really does give me great pleasure to introduce Fernando, who is going to speak about the impact of the blockade in Cuba and the importance of international solidarity to the Cuban people. Fernando, you're very welcome to take the floor.
Thank you, Bob. Rob, and thank you all for being in tune with this event. Thanks to all the participants and speakers in this opportunity that these technologies provide us now that we're all sitting in our countries and not able to participate in live events and encounters and meets that the solidarity movement throughout the world organize. You were talking about the importance of solidarity, and I would say taking advantage of that in the gentle introduction that you made, is that if I'm sitting here and speaking to all of you, it is in great part thanks to the solidarity with Cuba and the campaign to free the Cuban Five, of which Cuba's solidarity campaign was a part of and made important contributions. But long before we were in prison, Cuba had the benefit of counting on the solidarity of hundreds and thousands of people throughout the world. It is no different today. The blockade has been in place, enforced by the United States government for almost 60 years now. And I want to focus my presentation on examples of actions taken by the Trump administration against Cuba and how they have impacted our people's life. I will start by saying in June 2017, President Trump showed up at the Manuel Martinez Theater in Miami, surrounded by most of the most reactionary elements of the Cuban American community in South Florida. And it was at this event that he signed the Presidential National Security Memorandum on strengthening the United States policy towards Cuba, thus reversing the Presidential National Security Memorandum that the President Obama had signed about 2 years before. It is clear since that moment that the measures imposed by the Trump administration are oriented to bankrupt the Cuban economy. They target the main aspects of our economy, such as the tourism sector and the export of professional services, in addition to directly attacking certain vulnerabilities of our economy, such as energy dependence and the need to attract direct foreign investments. Some of the measures that have been taken by the Trump administration as part of this tightening the embargo, or what is euphemistically called the embargo, and we denounce as a blockade. In November 2017, the United States Department of State published a list of 180 Cuban entities and establishments that Americans could no longer visit. The list includes hotels, shops, raw manufacturing facilities, marinas, and the economic development zone at the Marina Port. Currently, that list includes more than 200 Cuban entities sanctioned by the United States government. The Treasury Department of the United States government issued its own set of restrictions on travel to Cuba for educational and cultural exchanges for US citizens. These included the complete elimination of the people-to-people educational travel licenses, which was the tribal license under which most of the Americans traveled to Cuba. In March 2018, the Secretary of State, Pompeo, announced that the United States would activate the clause of the Helms-Burton Act known as Title III. As we remember, the Helms-Burton Act was put in place by President Clinton in 1996, but ever since the Helms-Burton Act was passed, Title III of that act was always, every 6 months, was signed by the US president not to be in place. It's a title that uses the court system in the United States to persecute those companies who do business with Cuba. In 2019, 86 new measures were adopted by the US government against Cuba, hindering even our ability to respond to COVID-19 as we would have liked. And here we have to mention, and it's important to mention, that as good as the effort of our government has been in fighting COVID, not only in Cuba, but providing services to other countries throughout the world, we have done that in the midst of this tightening of the blockade and in the midst of a campaign by the US government against Cuban solidarity support with health professionals to other countries of the world. In June 2019, travel to Cuba was further limited by the United States government, banning group travel on cruises, yachts, and corporate planes. More than 638,000 Cuban Americans visited Cuba in 2018, but that number has dropped significantly in the current year. Owners of small Cuban businesses, such as restaurants, hostels, which enjoy an increase in the trade with American visitors, felt and has felt the impact of this reduction in the number of visitors from the United States. Indeed, it has had a greater impact on the Cuban private sector because U.S. travelers, according to the regulations of the United States Treasury Department, were more likely to stay in private pensions and hire private drivers and tour guides than government ones. In September 2019, remittances are limited to a maximum of 1,000 every 3 months, and this is only allowed for direct family members to those who lived in the United States, those Cubans who lived in the United States. In December 2019, at the request of the State Department, the Department of Transportation suspended all commercial flights to Cuba, except to Havana, and subsequently, this suspension was extended to charter flights in 2012. These actions mainly affect the family trips, already significantly damaged by the closure of the United States consulate in Havana. The U.S. Treasury Department further limited Cuba's access to the U.S. financial system. This is having a significant impact on how the Cuban entities, whether private or state-owned, conduct their businesses with partners in Canada, Europe, Asia, and Latin America. There are many examples of how difficult it has become to transfer money from any country in the world to Cuba. The Treasury Department sentenced the British company Action to pay a fine of several $100,000 in April 2019. In September 2019, OFAC, which is the office of the Treasury Department that enforces the rules on the embargo, imposed sanctions on various oil entities in Cyprus and Panama responsible for supplying fuel to the island of Cuba. In December 2019, 6 other foreign oil tankers were blacklisted by the United States for transporting oil to Cuba. The pressure on foreign shipping companies restricted the importation of oil to our country, imposed the elaboration of a ration plan for fuel oil, affecting the Cuban economy, agriculture, and food production. This reduction affected public transport, electricity, mainly in work centers, the operation of factories, and other vital services in our country. It is one of the clearest examples of the extraterritorial reach of the United States government's sanctions. Now, how things have been intensified with COVID-19 and the cruelty of some of these new U.S. measures taken during the pandemic, we can mention that in pandemic times, the United States hindered access to medicine and vital equipment for the treatment of COVID-19, as well as raw materials to produce in Cuba those drugs and medications. This resulted in the production of first-degree drugs for medical care and those acquiring community pharmacies by the population being affected. The exporting and importing company BioCuba Pharma reported the return of a ship to the port of origin with 2 containers of raw materials to be used in the production of medicines and other diagnostic means. Although it was already in Havana, prepared to discharge, this ship had been warned of a sanction by the United States government and was returned to the port of origin. The United States maliciously intends to publicize Cuban medical cooperations such as human trafficking or slave trade at modern times, degrading and slandering one of the most beautiful efforts of the Cuban Revolution in supporting other countries with our healthcare professionals. Despite the fact that the pressures of the United States managed to force the cessation of the medical services provided by Cuba to peoples such as Bolivia and Brazil, countries where they orchestrated coup d'etat, The vast majority of the countries have rejected these slandering and threats. The truth is that this cooperation is even broader today and enjoys worldwide recognition for its professional and humanistic quality. And we must say also that during the pandemic, the efforts of the solidarity movement in clearing out and explaining the role of our healthcare services throughout the world has been very important in defeating the campaign by the US government. In June 2020, proposals for a law by 3 senators from the US Republican Party, these are Rick Scott, Marco Rubio, and Ted Cruz, aim at punishing countries that accept Cuba's medical cooperation. These objectives, the objectives of this project, the cut profits to the Cuban Regime Act, is to curb the income received by Cuba through the brigades of health professionals, which have received recognition from many states and international organizations. During the last 4 months, Havana has sent 44 similar brigades to 37 countries of the world at the request of their respective governments to help local professionals to fight COVID-19. Those are some of the examples that I wanted to mention regarding the work of Cuban healthcare professionals and the will of the Cuban government and the Cuban people to not only fight COVID within our national borders, but also provide the help that other countries need in fighting the pandemic. I don't know, I probably have been speaking longer than I wanted to, but I wanted to mention these examples. And again, I want to thank all of you, Cuba Solidarity Campaign, for organizing this event, and all those speakers that will speak afterwards, and all those who are in tune with this event. Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you so much, Fernando. As I said before, it's a real honor that you're with us here today. There's a film on Netflix right now called The Wasp Network, which many people over here have been watching, and it tells the story of the Miami Five, a partial story and perhaps a Hollywood version of that story. But it's very interesting for some people if they want to find out a bit more about your history and the history of the work of the Five. Thank you once again, Fernando. I know you didn't have a lot of time to talk about the wonderful work of the Cuban doctors, but it's something that we will touch on. I'm sure Gail and Jeremy also will be talking about the international work of Cuba as we go through the meeting. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Gail Walker, who's joining us from the United States. Gail is the Executive Director of IFCO, the Interreligious Foundation for Community Organization in the United States. And IFCO coordinate an annual Pastors for Peace blockade busting caravan of material aid that travels to the island each year. And they also facilitate hundreds of scholarships for young people from the United States who can't afford training to become medical doctors to go to Cuba, where they are given free training at the Latin American Medical School. And IFCO have been working on that program for almost 20 years. So I know Gail is going to speak not only about the work that she does, but also about the solidarity over so many years between the United States and Cuba. Thank you very much, Gail, for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening. And thank you, Rob, and the Cuba Solidarity Campaign for this wonderful opportunity to mark this historic anniversary, July 26th, the start of the Cuban Revolution. I'd be remiss in also not extending my my profound gratitude and greetings to my brother Fernando González York of ICAP, and our brother Corbyn from the AP, Jeremy Corbyn. So thank you. It's a great honor to be with you all. The attack on the Moncada and the Carlos Manuel de Cespedes barracks in Santiago on July 29, 1959 was a pivotal moment in Cuba's effort to start the overthrow of the dictator Fulgencio Batista, as many of us know. 67 years later, Cuba has been able to achieve tremendous gains for its people and its global neighbors. Prior to the triumph of Cuba's revolution, the vast majority of Cubans were living in abject poverty, unable to access education, and suffering from curable diseases. And Cuba has been able to completely reverse that situation, and for that reason serves as a great example for those of us who believe in any form of justice. There are various ways that the US government's relentless blockade impact Cuba, and our brother Fernando just mentioned several of them. One example of the blockade that my organization, IFCO, has experienced firsthand was having our tax-exempt status taken away by the US government's Internal Revenue Service because of our support of Cuba through our Friendshipment Caravan project. And thankfully, after a very long battle, we had our status reinstated. And many of us have also heard the horror stories of medical need in Cuba that went unfulfilled because of the blockade. And some of you may know Reverend Raul Suarez of the Martin Luther King Center in the Havana neighborhood of Marianao. His wife, Clarita, many years ago tragically died when she was unable to get the medicines that she needed that were only manufactured in the US. And there are countless similar stories like this across Cuba, all a direct result of the blockade. But it is important to note that this blockade policy is a double-edged sword. Because of the blockade, people in the US have been denied access to cutting-edge medical treatments that Cuba has manufactured, including Herberproc P, which treats those with life-threatening diabetic foot ulcers, and Simivax, a treatment for lung cancer. We know of people from the US who have risked fines and imprisonment to travel to Cuba to receive these life-saving treatments. And Cuba is also successfully administering the human recombinant interferon alpha 2B for COVID-19 patients. Again, because of the blockade, we can't receive access to these treatments here in the United States. This extension...
Gail, we've lost your... Oh, you're back. We've got your visuals back. Carry on.
Oh, I am so sorry. Okay, sorry about that. This extension of helping, of lending a helping hand is not new for the island nation. Cuba has also offered many a lifeline when disaster has struck. We see that at time the world is struggling to combat coronavirus. Cuba has sent medical brigades to numerous countries. We've seen the landing of planes with boatloads. It feels like with plane loads of Cuban physicians going to numerous countries to provide life-saving help. Since the pandemic began, Cuba has deployed tens of thousands of medical workers to dozens of communities, countries, including China and Italy and Spain, Suriname, Jamaica, the list goes on and on, Dominica, Belize, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and many, many, many others. But historically, Cuba has helped countries in need. This is not new. From hurricanes that have devastated the Central American countries, communities like Nicaragua and Honduras in the 90s, to earthquakes that have ravaged Pakistan and Haiti, and of course fighting Ebola in 2014, the outbreak in Western Africa, and of course today, the fight against coronavirus. So these are just some of the reasons why we honor Cuba and lift her up. This is why those of us who stand for justice see the need to stand in solidarity with Cuba. Her example of what it means to truly put people first gives us hope. It's something we admire and embrace and are encouraged to replicate in our home countries. For nearly 3 decades, IFCO, the Interreligious Foundation for Community Organization, through our special project Pastors for Peace, has proudly stood in solidarity with our Cuban family, resisting the US government's longstanding brutal blockade toward Cuba. Over these past decades, IFCO has always respected, embraced, and admired the tremendous love and respect that Cuba has enjoyed in the international community. Yet we have also understood that those of us living in the belly of the beast, the so-called belly of the beast, in the midst of the very empire that has been obsessed with controlling Cuba for centuries and has attempted to undermine her revolution for the past 61 years, we have a special responsibility to protest the US government's abuse. And for those of us living in the US, who truly believe that Cuba has shown us that another world is possible. We are inspired by the tenacious spirit of our Cuban family. Against all odds, against the brutal sanctions imposed by the US administration after US administration, Cuba has managed to hold on to her principled commitment to embrace justice and global solidarity and to serve as a true neighbor standing on the right side. How could we not be inspired by a country that proves that medical internationalism is the right way to go? A country that supports the right to health and education and serves as an example in the areas of sustainable development and the environment, supports the right of women, children, migrant workers, and stands opposed to the torture and other cruel, inhumane treatment. It is for this reason that for the past 3 decades, IFCO, an organization founded by people of faith and conscience who profoundly believe in justice, have supported Cuba and worked to break the US government's blockade. We do this in a number of ways. Many of you know about our annual transshipment caravans through which we use the tactic of civil disobedience to speak out and act out against the US government's longstanding draconian blockade of Cuba. We collect humanitarian aid to be delivered to the Cuban people, not as an act of charity, but as a gesture of friendship and an alternative to the US government's policy toward Cuba. We travel without seeking government permission because we believe it is our right to travel to Cuba without a license that the US government requires. We speak out against the government's unjust, immoral, and illegal blockade to help people, to educate people about the impact of the blockade, not only on Cuba, but on the people living here in the US. In addition, we organize educational delegations, as many groups do, under a number of themes, all to allow people to see Cuba for themselves, to fight the information blockade. We know that anyone born in the United States and many other countries, no matter their age, have been exposed to negative campaigns of indoctrination about Cuba. And we feel that the only way for people to really get a chance to see and understand Cuba is to go there and to see it for themselves, to speak with the people, breathe the air, eat the food, of course, drink a mojito, and really get a chance to enjoy the flavor of Cuba. To bear witness is really to go and see it for themselves. And then, of course, Rob, as you mentioned, since 2000, the year 2000, we have been honored to serve as the sole US facilitator of the Latin American School of Medicine program, which provides opportunities for young people, particularly young people of color, to be able to become doctors, to serve in medically underserved communities across the United States, and really to help transform our broken healthcare system here in the United States. It's an honor to highlight the incredible gift of solidarity to Cuba.
Hi, I think we may have lost the connection to the United States. We lost Gail a bit before when we were testing the link.
Uh-oh. Have I lost you?
Yeah, you're back up now, Gail, but it's a bit faulty, so maybe if you come to the end.
Okay, we're following up here. You gave me a lot of things you wanted me to chat on, Robin. I took it seriously, maybe too seriously, but it's a chance to talk about Cuba, which is always wonderful. I wanted to say, finally, an important piece of the work that we do is we produce a product called the Cuba Buzz, and it's to help break the pervasive misinformation campaign that is so prevalent in the United States about Cuba. So it's been an honor to do this work. I want to just end by saying that, on the 60th anniversary of ICAP, the Cuban Institute for Friendship with the Peoples, we extend our love and our appreciation for the years of friendship with the world. And as we were recently reminded by our dear brother, Fernando, ICAP founder, Comandante Fidel Castro, affirmed that, quote, being internationalists means paying our own debt with humanity, and whoever cannot fight for others will never be able to sufficiently fight for ourselves. And this profound statement, and it's a very profound statement when you really unpack it, serves as an important lesson for the rest of the globe and helps to explain why revolutionary Cuba has maintained a commitment to generously share what she has with the rest of the planet. And for this, we owe a debt of gratitude to our beloved Cuba. And I appreciate the opportunity to, again, lift up Cuba while we remain compartmentalized in our own worlds and quarantined in some parts of the world. Our solidarity with Cuba is forever. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gail, for your lovely words. It's great that you were able to join us today. I know it was tricky for you today, but thank you so much for taking the trouble. If anyone wants to hear, we did a meeting a few weeks ago with Gail, specifically talking about coronavirus and the work within Cuba to fight the pandemic, and also their international work. And Gail was truly wonderful. And that meeting is available online on the Cuba Solidarity Campaign website if you want to go back to hear that meeting. I'm really pleased to say we have over 400 people right now watching us on YouTube. There are people from Cuba, but also from countries such as Vietnam, Canada, Sweden, Bulgaria, Nicaragua, and so on and so forth. So we are really, truly an international gathering today. And it really is lovely to see people here from the UK, but from the United States and from Cuba, as well as from around the world. It's very much how we would like the world to be, a country joined together rather than separated. So it's wonderful that you're all with us. Our next speaker needs little introduction, but before I do invite him to say a few words, he's been a long-standing supporter of Cuba and Cuba Solidarity. I remember some wet evenings outside the US Embassy when we were protesting for the freedom of the Miami Five at the annual vigil we used to hold there. Jeremy was incredibly helpful in securing visas for Fernando, but also for Rene and Gerardo, two other members of the Miami Five, to visit Britain after their release, when the British government decided that it was not safe to have them come to visit us. So we were very pleased for the support we received from Jeremy at that time. I know Jeremy spent some time traveling around Cuba on various occasions, including one time on a bicycle on a Cuba Solidarity Campaign bike ride, which was a wonderful advertisement for the sorts of work that we get up to. So he's always spoken up against the injustice of the blockade. So it gives me a great pleasure, Jeremy, to welcome you here today. Jeremy Corbyn MP and former leader of the Labour Party. Jeremy.
Rob, thank you very much. Buenos dias, cubanos. Buenos dias, el pueblo del mundo esta noche. Esta noche en Londres. Can I say thank you, Rob, very much for inviting me. And it's a real pleasure to follow Gail, and I enjoyed everything she said. Gail, thank you very much for what you said and the way you put it. It was wonderful. And to have this event in commemoration of Cuba's immense achievements since 1959 is quite something. And Cuba has a special and esteemed place in the world. And when I was invited to Mexico City for the inauguration of the new president, of our friend AMLO, of López Obrador, who was asked to sit next to the president of Cuba. I was honored to be able to do that and for us to celebrate that occasion together, that Mexico had a new president. And of course, the relationship between Mexico and Cuba has actually been generally positive and quite good for a very long time. There's so much I could say, but I just want to reflect on a few personal things first. That I remember as a child, I must have been 10 years old, when the news came through on the one news channel we had in those days, that Havana was now a different city and under a different management, and that Fidel and the revolutionary forces had reached Havana. And my mother heard this and rushed upstairs to my bedroom to tell me that Cuba has changed at last. And it was kind of a magic moment. I was only 10 years old, and then she next morning got an atlas out and checked out where Cuba was, and I thought, that's really great. And ever since then, I've been very impressed by the way in which, for all the isolation that's been imposed on Cuba, the blockade of Cuba, and the economic attacks on Cuba, Cuba has achieved immense changes within its society. Education freely available for all, healthcare freely available for all, and all the other things that ought to be part of everyone's life all around the world. The economic development of Cuba has been immense. I've had the pleasure of visiting Cuba on 3 occasions, and I recall my first visit was in the 1980s, and it was moving into the special period. Life was quite difficult, and there were clearly problems about supply. And I remember a long discussion I had with Cuban people about the agricultural system that Cuba had developed, and how we were sort of reflecting on the need for a more localized, more sustainable system of agriculture and fresh food production, which I'm pleased to say Cuba is now a model of around the world. And so it was that interest and that openness to develop which I thought was so fascinating. But I also remember a little vignette and a piece of history. I was staying in a hotel which had an unguarded fan in it to keep us cool. Obviously the fan should have been guarded, it wasn't. It had metal blades, and I reached across the room and my hand collided with the blades, and my hand was very badly cut as a result of this. And so I rushed out of the hotel, and the taxi driver took me, and was not prepared to accept any payment because I was clearly suffering some discomfort. I got to the hospital, and the first person started asking who I was and why I needed treatment. At which point a doctor came in and told the person on the desk off very, very sharply, "You're not to delay a patient with bureaucracy. What comes first is treating the patient's needs." And so they duly treated me extremely well, and I thanked them profusely for it. And in fact, it was just dressings I needed. Then they said, "Where are you going to?" I said I was traveling onwards to Central America. I was going to Nicaragua and El Salvador. And they said, "Oh." And I thought, oh goodness, have I said something wrong here? They said, "No, wait." And they came back with the most enormous box of bandages, ointments, medicines, everything you could need. I said, "Well, that's really great, but I've got a cut hand. It's going to recover. I'll probably be okay in a couple of weeks. You've given me enough here for a year." They said, "Yeah, but people in Nicaragua need it." So I took this massive, great box of medicine, which was I clearly didn't really need personally. And the first thing I did on arrival was present it to a local health center there, and they were very, very grateful. It's that sort of personal things that one remembers about Cuba. And on other visits, one time I went on a cycle ride around Cuba with my son, with Ben, who was 15 at the time. We were raising money for the asthma campaign in Cuba, and we cycled all around, went to Pino del Rio and around the mountains and so on. And what I can remember about that visit was how incredibly pleasant and friendly everyone was wherever we went, how little traffic there was, which was magic for cyclists. And there's an awful lot of hills, and it's very hot. But we had a great time, and we raised a lot of money. And again, in discussion with people in the towns and villages we went to, it was fascinating. And then they talked about Cuba's role internationally. And I don't think people should ever forget that the first international visit made by later President Mandela, when he was released from prison, was to Cuba, to say thank you. Thank you to the people of Cuba for what they did to defeat the apartheid regime in South Africa. And it was my pleasure on a visit to Angola, where I led a parliamentary delegation there, to visit Cuito Carnavale, which of course was the site of the Great Battle, where many Cubans lost their lives. And there's a beautiful memorial to Cubans in Angola to say thank you for the part you played when the regime in South Africa was trying to defeat the new government in Angola, and Cuba came to its aid. But Cuba's contribution in changing the living standards and life chances of people in Cuba is quite incredible. Nowhere more so than in the system of healthcare. And I had a long discussion with a doctor who ran a medical house in a village in Cuba. And what impressed me was that his role as the doctor was to be the holistic doctor for the village. I go to my GP just around the corner here from my office where I'm at the moment, and they're wonderful people, and they look after me very well, as they look after everybody else very well. But their job begins and ends with my medical condition. His job never begun and never ended, because his job was the holistic health they have, the air they breathe, the food they eat, the lifestyle they have. And so he said he had fairly robust conversations about the amount they ate, the amount they drank, how they lived their lives. His was about the health of the entire community, and particularly of young people. And so it was very much preventative health care. And the Cuban model has been fascinating in the ability of Cuba, not a large country, to send emergency doctors all around the world. I've met Cuban doctors in many places. I've seen them at work in different scenarios around the world. And I thought one of the most impressive things was when there was some terrible natural disaster in Pakistan, an earthquake. Who's first there? Cuban doctors. It's a very long way from Cuba to Pakistan, and they arrived, and they wouldn't have known very much about the culture or the place, but they got stuck in immediately and did incredible work. And people, when I was there for the World Social Forum, were telling me how much they appreciated the work, not just in Pakistan, but around the world, of Cuban doctors. And as the coronavirus took hold around the world, there's that lovely picture on our television screens of Cuban doctors arriving in Italy and being feted and welcomed at the airport. And thanks for coming, because they were there to try and deal with the crisis, and they brought with them all the necessary preventative stuff, the PPE and everything else that they need. So thank you very much to Cuba for the support they've given to people all around the world. And when you look at the response of Cuba towards the corona crisis and Cuba's support for what the World Health Organization is trying to achieve around the world of universal health care, and compare that to the utterances of President Bolsonaro in Brazil towards the crisis, it really is quite something. And this afternoon I was watching on Al Jazeera an interview with the former president of Brazil, Lula, who was describing the achievements of the government of Brazil, but also the work done, which we do know about, of Cuban doctors in helping healthcare in Brazil and so many other countries all around Latin America. So thank you, Cuba, for all of that. We have huge challenges as a planet. We have massive environmental challenges. We cannot go on with the current rate of emissions, with the pollution levels, with the carbon dioxide emissions, and the loss of biodiversity, which is very, very serious, and at the end of the day threatens all of us. So I hope we can use this moment of reflection to work together with people all over the world, and I'm sure Cuba will be very much part of that, so that when COP26 finally takes place next year, it goes much further than COP25, which was in Paris, and helps to bring about that environmentally sustainable world, because that is the kind of world I want to live in, and we all want to live in, and the people of Cuba want to live in. And the last thing I'd say is this. The last century saw tens of millions of people killed in war, in human rights abuses, killed through poverty, killed through pollution, killed through so many causes, all of which could have been prevented. So we all have a duty to recognize we need to develop a world that's directed towards peace. We need to develop a world that's free of nuclear weapons, and we need to develop a world where we look at the victims of war and the causes of war. It's actually quite easy to get a sense going that it's a good idea to go and have a conflict somewhere. I was in Parliament when Britain, quite wrongly, went to war in Iraq. And all those years later, that was 2003, all those years later, what do we see? The victims of that war in Iraq, the poverty, the refugees, and the human rights abuses in the whole region. There has to be that determination to bring about peace through understanding. And I want that relationship with Cuba to be a good and a close one, to support each other on education, on health, on technology. We have great transport technology in this country, which I'd want to share with Cuba. Cuba has massive medical technologies that I think we can all learn from. There's a lot we can learn from each other. When people put themselves in silos, they become silos of ignorance. When you take down the walls of the silos, they become the open space for the sharing of creativity and ideas. And so, thank you, Cuba. Congratulations on what's been achieved over all these years. And it's always been my pleasure visiting Cuba. And I look forward to going to Cuba again and enjoying the place and the people, the culture, the history, and the music, and understand where Cuba came from. A colony that the people were enslaved, later a commercial colony of another power, the United States, in which the people in different forms were enslaved, and then Cuba achieved its place in the world. And I wish we'd been in government to be the government that had a good relationship with Cuba, but we're the people of this country, and we have a good relationship with Cuba, and long may that stay so. Thank you very much, Rob, and thank you all the other participants on this call today.
Thank you, Jeremy, so much. It's wonderful that you could join us tonight, and I hope you'll stay for questions and so forth. I was obviously pondering you as Prime Minister, and what a wonderful thing that would have been for us all. A very, very different situation from the one we're in right now. I think, however, it's a moment of crisis internationally. Over 500,000 people have died of coronavirus. And looking at Cuba and what the Cuban people and the Cuban medics in particular have been able to show us is a different way of responding to that crisis. And I mean, Fernando said they're now in over 40 countries. I mean, every other day there seems to be another country where the Cuban doctors are responding to requests to go and help the people there. We were very, very pleased in the last few weeks that the British government have cooperated with the Cuban government to in the requests from 2 British overseas territories in the Caribbean, Anguilla and the Turks and Caicos Islands, who both requested assistance from Cuba. And the British government, working with the Cuban government, facilitated those medical brigades to go to those islands. So credit where credit's due. We're very, very pleased that Britain, France, Italy, many countries around the world are cooperating with Cuba and are standing up to the bully boy tactics of the Trump administration at the moment, which is really moving in the direction of trying to block such international cooperation at a time of international crisis, which really is a terrible, terrible thing and very repugnant, really, at this moment in time. Yesterday, as Gail mentioned, was the 26th of July, which is a huge date in Cuban history. It marks the day in 1953 when Fidel and a small group of young revolutionaries attacked the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba. It was a very unsuccessful attack, symptomatic really of Cuba, really, a small group of revolutionaries trying to overthrow a giant dictatorship, not dissimilar to the situation Cuba finds itself now with the US on the door. But it was a very important moment, and I know that the Cuban ambassador will speak a bit more about that because it is so symbolic of Cuba today. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Cuban ambassador to say some words today. So you're very welcome, Bárbara Montalvo, Her Excellency, the Cuban ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Thank you to the dear comrades of the... No, yeah. Are you listening to me? Right. Okay. Thank you to the dear comrades of the Cuban Solidarity Campaign and dear friends who accompany us today. I would like to especially thank to Jeremy, Gail, and Fernando for their presence in this special meeting of Solidarity with Cuba, done in a relevant moment. I have listened to your interventions with a great emotion. As you remember, yesterday we celebrated the 67th anniversary of the attack on the Moncada barracks, and it was on the 26th July 1953 when a group of 135 men headed by Fidel Castro played a leading role in one of the most heroic and relevant passages of Cuban history. The surprise factor was lost, as known, and the military action failed. However, that defeat had an extraordinary impact on the Cuban history. A period of armed fight started and only ended with the defeat of tyranny and the triumph of the revolution on January 1st, 1959. This year we'll also commemorate the 60th anniversary of the ICAP, the creation of the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the people. But I would like to underline that without Moncada and the revolution, we had never had ICAP. And without ICAP, the natural solidarity spirit of the Cuban people would have never expressed beyond our frontier, geographic borders, as today. The concept homelandness humanity will remain a wish if Cuba did not meet its internationalist duty, wherever needed, without expecting something in return. And the solidarity movement with our country will probably not be the same if the attack of the Moncada barracks had not taken place, if we had not conducted a revolution, if we had not embraced and defended at a very high cost a social project that, despite lacks and imperfections, places the human being in the center of national attention and in the center of its international commitments. Cuba does not accept a neoliberal philosophy in which the population is divided into a minority of privileged people and a multitude of disposable people. We never act of that manner. Virtual events like this reflects a hard reality, as all of you mentioned. These are pandemic times. The devastating experience of COVID-19 has proved that we are as dependent of each other as we are vulnerable. It is an imperative to close the inequality gaps around the world and to make universal cooperation a reality. Today, speakers have mentioned the Cuban experience to face the pandemic, as well as the internationalist medical cooperation in some countries. Some are surprised to see how a small country, developing country, without huge natural resources, with 11 million inhabitants, under pressure to be economically suffocated, has been able to protect its population while offering support to other nations. And to understand how this has been possible, it is necessary to remember that for Cuba, there is a political will to keep people's health as a priority. And this is possible too because our main capital is human. Our most significant natural resource is the people. We have dedicated a major effort in this regard to have healthy, cultured, and educated citizens capable of contributing to the development of his own country and willing to serve others. The magnitude of the current crisis compels to cooperate and practice solidarity despite political differences. The virus knows no boundaries or ideology, but the Cuban international medical cooperation is being harshly attacked by the US government, and the blockade measures have been strengthened to unprecedented levels, as the speakers have explained. During the pandemic, the blockade has indeed become a major impediment for Cuba to acquire much needed medicines or acquire equipment and materials for our people, and well as to receive and provide international aid. And I think all previous interventions relieve me of expanding on this topic. But once again, this policy has failed because, Cuba has contained the pandemic. That is a fact. As Fernando mentioned, Following requests made to our country, 44 medical brigades have worked in 67 countries, including some British overseas territories. More than 3,700 health professionals. They have joined the rest of our personnel working in 58 countries. Moncada taught us to turn a setback into victory, to resist and to continue. Fidel left us a masterly synthesis of his thought on what revolution is, what it should always be, what principles we can never abandon. And he also talked about how men and women who carry it forward should be, and remind us what Jose Marti said: without unity, we would be defeated. And one just principle from the depths of a cave is more powerful than an army. The educational, scientific, and cultural work of the Cuban system has stimulated the creativity of Cubans and has prepared our people to be able to achieve emancipation and definitely overcome all vestiges of colonialism and dependency. We know very well what solidarity means. We highly value all actions to support our country undertaken here by the Cuban Solidarity Campaign and many other people in the UK and around the world who respect Cuba. And it is a support that encourages us to keep going and inspire us. And we need it today, possibly more than ever. The only thing that we can offer you as a sign of gratitude is our resistance and a way of acting that will never, never make you feel disappointed. I remember those young people who died on July 26, 1953, and those young people dreamed of this Solidarity Cuba, to which today you transmit encouragement and hope. Many thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you again for your kind words. It's been a fabulous meeting. We've had a number of questions from our viewers on YouTube. There's over 400 viewers right now, so we're very pleased. And again, I welcome all of you with us here. But there was one question which we're going to take later, but we'll take now because it follows on from Jeremy's comments. Fernando, it's to you. I heard you yourself in the late 1980s spent some time in Angola as part of the Cuban work in Angola. I mean, it was an incredible history. Some of you will know the stories of Quito Carnevale, the first defeat of the South African Defence Forces, and that led to really the defeat of the apartheid regime in South Africa. But interesting, the question is about why you went and why thousands of Cubans volunteer for such missions, not just in Angola, but around the world, even the doctors, but yourself, of course, as one of the 5 in Florida. But why is it that you volunteered to go on such a dangerous mission? And so many of your fellow country people do the same.
Well, let me start by saying that I was in Angola during the Quito Carnevale battle. I was not in the Quito Carnevale area, but I was in Angola at the time. Very definitive moment in 14 years of presence of Cuba in Angola and the Cuban military effort in Angola, because it was those years in which the conflict between, or is not the conflict between, it's the conflict that South Africa provoked on Angola had a definition. I can tell you, I was only 24 years old when I went to Angola. I just got graduated from the Institute of Higher Institute of Foreign Service, and then I went to Angola. I grew up in a country in which being solidary with other countries is something that is natural, and is something that my generation and the Cuban soul wish to have that experience. During those years, we heard about different efforts of the Cuban Revolution in different places. And it was only natural for me, a young individual, growing up in that environment and receiving the influence of our Cuban society and our families and the values in which I grew up. It was only natural that when the question was posed to me as whether I wanted to go or not, I said yes. And I have to say that no one went to Angola forcefully. All those who went to Angola or went to Ethiopia or went to any other countries back then, as it is right now, by our medical doctors and healthcare professionals and any other area of our society that contributes to other countries, it is done on a voluntary basis. Nobody went to Angola back then or now forcefully. Everybody goes on a voluntary basis. And for me, growing up in Cuba, growing up in the values of solidarity, in the values of Cuba being part of humanity, and not only looking within the country, but also as part of a community that is Latin America and is the world. It was easy for me. It was, I would say, it was a no-brainer. It's just you posed the question, and I said, of course I will. And I can tell you, it's I cannot say that I would be the person that I am today without that experience. It is an experience that I always cherish, and I will always cherish because of the impact that had in my my formative years, as to get to be the person that I am, and to face the decisions in my life as to what I wanted to do, and realities that I had to face years later. I could say that it strengthened me politically, it strengthened me as a human being, it strengthened me psychologically. I could say that it was a significant experience to me with 24 years of age to go to Angola and share with thousands of Cubans my age or even younger than I, and to share also with the Angolans that were members of the army in Angola, or with the members of the SWAPO from Namibia, and see them all fighting and struggling to achieve the independence of Namibia, or to save the integrity of territorial integrity of Angola. Having the experience of witnessing those individuals fighting with that consciousness, it helped strengthen my own consciousness and to grow as a person and as an individual. As many books as I read while I was studying in school and university about colonialism, it wasn't the same as traveling to Africa and seeing by myself the effects of colonialism. And the people decided to being free and help the country overcome that situation of colonialism, the effects of colonialism. So I would say it is I wouldn't be the same without that experience, and I really I really am privileged, and I feel that way, and as a Cuban, I understand why Cubans who've had that opportunity feel mostly the same way. Thankful for having that opportunity to have that experience and to strengthen our consciousness, political consciousness, ideological consciousness, and even strengthen ourselves as human beings. That's what I can say about it.
Thank you, Fernando, for those words. Thank you so much to help us to understand a different way of looking at the world, one of sharing what you have, not what you have left over is a phrase we often hear from Cuba, and it's wonderful to hear those words from you.
We use Fernando's words somewhere because they're fantastic. Fernando, thank you very much for what you said and the way you said it. Really, really powerful. Well done, you.
Thanks, Jeremy. I've got a number of questions coming in from YouTube. We've got a couple of questions we'll put together really about the United States and Cuba. And of course, Jeremy, Gail may want to come back in on those specifically. So there's been a number of questions about why the blockade continues 60 years after the revolution, 60 years ago. Why does the United States continue with this blockade? And whether another 4 years of President Trump, what would that do to the future relations, and whether Biden would be a better option vis-a-vis Cuba? I don't know, Jeremy, if you'd like to come back, or Gail in the first instance.
Well, I'm sorry.
Go, Gail, go on.
Just real quickly, I'd love to hear what Mr. Corbyn has to say as well. I think that we say often that the big part of why, I mean, that's the question that comes up. Why does this this government continue to embrace this this old policy? And the answer years ago, and I think it continues to be, is that the threat that Cuba represents, that it's a country, as we've spoken about here, that has always been very principled in its position, refusing to back down, even when it wasn't quote unquote popular, when it wasn't going to somehow benefit Cuba monetarily or in some form or fashion. That's just not in Cuba's DNA, and I think it's very much a threat of a country that maintains that kind of principle position is something that doesn't fit well with a country that has really been rooted in and the idea of capitalism, the idea of maintaining a different perspective, a different position, and how it is that you care for your people, and you organize government, you address the ways of providing support for your fellow human beings. It's very contrary, certainly in the to some of the positions that have been taken by the various administrations here in the United States. As far as the current administration, this is a challenge that that not only those of us here living in the U.S., but I think in the world are grappling with. I'm not. I think that my short version to that response is that I think that certainly things would be better under a new administration. At times I'm very saddened by the position that that politicians take when they feel that they have to kowtow to certain more conservative right-wing communities, particularly in the Cuban communities, particularly in Florida. We've seen Joe Biden waffle on certain levels as well, and so that's the reality. But I think we cannot do any. Well, I'd like to believe we couldn't do any worse than what we're grappling with now. I think that the mentality of the current occupant of the White House is something that we need to reject and try to do what we can to turn around. But I'd be curious, Minister Corbyn, from an international perspective, how do you look with your political view at what we're dealing with here, and what do you see as a hopeful future for those of us not only here in the U.S., but I think, as I said, in the international community?
In respect of Cuba, I actually feel quite optimistic, because if you look at the totality of the relations with Cuba, the USA went from invasion, isolation, denigration, Helms-Burton, and so on, to the Obama administration's rapprochement with Cuba and President Obama's visit to Cuba, which was highly significant. I must say, I kind of had to pinch myself at the idea of a US president there in Havana. I never thought I'd see that anytime soon. Trump has obviously gone back on a lot of that. But I do think the most important point in the USA ought to be a campaign to repeal Helms-Burton, because Helms-Burton as a piece of legislation is contrary to any principle of efficacy or free trade anywhere around the world. The idea you'd punish an individual company because it did any trade with Cuba. And of course, that extends to, you probably don't realize it in the USA particularly, but it actually extends quite considerably to what happens with American companies in Europe, that they get, if they don't deal with anybody who's also trading with Cuba. And of course, most European countries recognized the new government in Cuba from very early on and have maintained that relationship. I wanted us to improve our trading relationship with Cuba and also encourage the European Union to do exactly the same. The point that Rob made in his reply about the question on Corona was, I think, actually prescient in many ways, because whilst the government in Britain formally quite often criticizes Cuba, they don't when it comes to cooperation with Cuba in dealing with the drug trade in the Caribbean, where Cuba cooperation has been considerable. And they do recognize the enormous steps made by Cuba to help people in medical crises around the world. And the fact that they have agreed that Cuban doctors should go to British overseas territories in the Caribbean to help deal with the corona crisis there is, I think, highly significant. And I think it's something we should build on. At the end of the day, we all need good health. We all need something to eat. And we all want our children to get a good education and get a real chance in life. You don't do that if you isolate from us a country that has achieved all of those things. And I think there are lessons to be learned there. And I suspect at the end of Corona, if there ever is going to be a sort of formal ending of Corona, relations between Cuba and the rest of the Caribbean will be very much better in the future. And I think that's got to be for the good of all of us. And also the huge numbers of people from this country that have been to Cuba on holidays and so on, and their experience of Cuba is not what they've been told in the papers, and it has begun to change attitudes a great deal. So I wish you well with the campaigns in the USA, and I hope whatever administration presumably Biden is going to win brings in January does recognize that cooperation with Cuba is far better than the isolation of Cuba and the attacks on Cuba.
Thank you, Jeremy and Gail. I've got a question for Fernando and Bárbara, perhaps in a second. Before that, just on the blockade, we've got over 400 people watching, and many of the people watching are new to Cuba, new to the work of Cuba Solidarity Campaign, and perhaps are new to the whole issue of the blockade. It is an extraterritorial blockade, so it's not just about the United States and Cuba. The blockade impacts on countries and companies around the globe and stops companies and individuals and from trading with Cuba. If they do, they are liable to huge fines from the Office of Foreign Assets Control, the US Treasury, fines running into billions of pounds. So you have the situation where British banks such as Lloyds, the Royal Bank of Scotland, Barclays Bank have all paid over 200 million pounds in fines each to the Office of Foreign Assets Control for small trading historic trading with Cuba. A few years ago, the Cuba Solidarity Campaign ourselves had all our bank accounts closed down by the Cooperative Bank, a so-called ethical bank here in the UK, purely because the co-op was threatened by the legislation, the US sanctions legislation, and were concerned about the imposition of huge fines on the co-op. So they closed down the accounts of a small NGO in the UK. A couple of years ago, a young student, a Cuban student, was recommended by his professors at Westminster University to apply for a postgraduate course at the Open University. And the Cuban applied. He had all the qualifications, he had the visas, he even had the finances to secure his place. But he was turned down from the application. When he inquired, they said no. He said, is it because I haven't got the money? No. Is it because I don't have the qualifications? No. At the end of the day, it was because he was Cuban, and they admitted that was the case, that they too were concerned about the extraterritorial application of the blockade, and the Cuban student was stopped from even applying. And we took a legal case with the support of the trade unions and so on over here, and we won that legal case on the basis of the 2010 Equalities Act, the race relations legislation in this country, and that student is currently at the Open University. But it took a legal case to stop the Open University from even allowing a Cuban student. The tentacles of the blockade are extreme, affecting us in this country. Imagine what it's like trying to do international trade as a Cuban company or a Cuban enterprise in that. So it's a very vicious blockade that really does impact on Cuba's society and Cuba's possibility to develop. Right, the question that I have is one that's come in from a few people. It's about the possible ending of the blockade. If the blockade ended, are Cubans concerned about the return of capitalism? And perhaps someone's mentioned, would you like to have McDonald's on the streets of Havana or Starbucks or something like that? How do Cubans foresee the ending of the blockade? Is that a problem, or is it something we believe you're campaigning for it. Tell us a bit about your thoughts about the end of the blockade and the possible return to capitalism. Fernando, maybe, or Bárbara.
I defer to the ambassador. I defer to the ambassador to answer the question if you would like to.
Okay, Fernando, you have the word.
Well, could one of you answer it anyway?
Fernando, por favor, es mejor que te escuchen a ti.
Right. Well, the issue of whether the blockade would impact on Cuba's political future, it's, for us, Cubans, we're not concerned about that. Our future is decided by our people. And we have all the political clarity and the willingness of the people to build a society that is based on different principles. The blockade is part of a policy by different US administrations since the very beginning of the Cuban Revolution. That is, its purpose is very clear since the United States Department of State provided the president, back then President Kennedy, with a memorandum suggesting the policy to follow against Cuba. And the policy and the memorandum is right there, black and white. It's nothing that the Cuban government has come up with, or is not the result of any analysis or anything. It's in black and white. An Undersecretary of State in the United States State Department advising the president as to what was the right policy to follow with Cuba. And right there, in black and white, it is said, the Cuban people supports the Cuban government. The only way to take that support from the Cuban government is to make the Cuban economy failed to make the Cuban people go through hardships and difficulties. And the thinking was that then the Cuban people would blame the government, thus getting rid of that government. But if we have been able to survive these 60 years of revolution, is it because the people, in spite of all those difficulties, we are aware where most of those difficulties come from. And we're not blaming the government for those difficulties. We are very aware that it is a blockade. Now, we are an underdeveloped country. We're not a rich country. Provided that there's no blockade, of course, we would be in a better position to carry out the plans that are already set for the Cuban economy to grow faster, to provide better conditions of living for our Cuban people, to provide most of the things that we are not able to provide now. But as far as to what kind of economic and political society we want, it has been decided by the Cubans. A couple of years ago, we went through the process of passing in Parliament a new constitution. A constitution, by the way, that was discussed throughout the country. And I challenge the United States people and the United States government to put a project like that to be discussed by all society, to discuss what kind of society they want, what kind of government they want, and how to organize the society. I humbly say that the US government would not last a couple of weeks if they do that. So we in Cuba, in the midst of all the difficulties, like 60 years of blockade and 60 years of economic hardships that brought to the people, we did that. And what is the response of the Cuban people? We want a socialist society. We want a socialist society that is led by the Cuban Communist Party. Because we are well aware, very well aware, that is the unity around that Communist Party that has brought independence to Cuba and the ability and the capability to resist, to withstand, and to survive until today. And it is with the Communist Party, and it is in a socialist society that we want to live, whether with the blockade or without the blockade. And of course, we would like to live in a society without the blockade. And by the way, almost 77% of the Cuban population today have lived under the blockade our whole lives. And nothing, whether the blockade or anything else, is going to change the decision of the Cuban people to have a socialist society. We wish to have a socialist society without the hardships that the blockade brings to the Cuban people.
Thank you, Fernando, very much. We have lots of meetings around the country, and people say, well, Cuba's a wonderful place to visit now because there's not many Americans, there's no McDonald's, there's no advertising. And won't it be a shame when the blockade is ended and that all happens again? And we have to explain, well, at the end of the day, the shame is that it's for the Cuban people to decide their future. And at the moment, that decision as to whether they have certain companies or certain transactions in their country is taken away from them by the United States blockade. So the whole point of solidarity is to recognize the independence and sovereignty of the Cuban people to determine their own future, and how a post-blockade Cuba would look is for the Cuban people to decide. We're coming to the end of our time, and I want to give everybody a chance to say some final words. Just to say we haven't been able to answer all the questions. We had some sent in advance through Eventbrite, and we've picked up a few from YouTube, and I'm sorry if we haven't been able to answer all of them in the time that we have. But one that keeps coming up is about the Cuban doctors within the pandemic, and I specifically want to start with Jeremy on this, because in my mind, or in our mind, the recent history of Cuba's internationalism in a time of world health crisis and the difference in their response to the response of some of the richer countries around the world is really incredible, and is a history that really should be told to the world. And I remember, Jeremy, your last speech as leader in Parliament, where you mentioned the Cuban doctors. There's currently a campaign for the Cuban doctors to receive the Nobel Prize, and I wonder if you have heard about that campaign, or you wanted to say any more about Cuba's internationalism. And I'd like then to give everybody a chance to respond in general to any of the points that they've come across in the meeting or they want to say. Jeremy.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks for putting this call on. And it's great that we've had this call from computer screens and so on all around the world. And I think it's a message that we can do that all the time. We don't have to wait for a corona crisis to talk to each other in this fantastic way. So thank you very much for putting it on. And it's been a real pleasure to be part of it. I think the response to the corona crisis around the world, to look at it, is a fascinating exercise. Corona exists, it's dangerous, it's real, and it's cost an awful lot of lives. The World Health Organization warned about it. Action was taken better in some countries than others, and we've now seen the results of that. But by and large, it's the poorest people in the poorest countries, or those poorest people in some of the richest countries, that have suffered the most because of the corona crisis. And it's exposed the inequalities in wealthy societies as much as it's exposed inequalities all around the world. But it's also exposed something about the attitude towards health. And it goes back to my experience with the medicine house in Cuba, in the village that I was in, where the doctor who was in charge of the medicine house, his job was the health, the public health, as well as the personal health of everybody and the way in which they lived their lives. And so I want to say, let's recognize what Cuba has achieved. And I think I'm right in saying that in 1959, when Fidel and the revolutionary forces came to Havana, there were 6 doctors in Cuba, and most of them, I think, went. So they started off from a position of hardly anybody helping them at all. In fact, Che Guevara was probably one of the very few doctors in the country at the time. And look at Cuban healthcare now, because they made it a complete priority that if people are to have confidence in their government and their society, then they've got to have confidence their health is going to be taken seriously by that government. So thank you, Cuba, for what you've done for your health service there, but also huge thanks for what you've achieved around the world, where you've been able to send doctors at very short notice to help people during a crisis, but also to help with health education and the training of doctors for the future. There is no point in having a race for a coronavirus vaccine. I don't want to race for one. I want to race towards getting one where we cooperate and share each other's research. If you've got medical company A competing with medical company B and country C competing with country D, isn't the whole point that you share it? Isn't that the whole point about scientific research? Every piece of learning is supposed to be on top of an aggregation of all the learning that went before. So I hope that our lesson from all this is we need a strong and effective World Health Organization. We don't need countries walking away. And I hope the first thing that a Biden administration coming in does is rejoins the World Health Organization. We need it properly funded. And above all, we need a trade and an aid system that ensures you get not just Cuban doctors coming when there's an emergency, but you get the growth of real health services all around the world. And I think there are many lessons to learn from Cuba, but in particular, it's the one about healthcare and the holistic environment in which we want to live. So can I say, Rob, thank you for inviting me on the call. What an absolute pleasure it's been to speak alongside colleagues, and Fernando, Gail, Bárbara, thank you very, very much for what you've said today. And Rob, of course, thank you to Cuba Solidarity for the work you've done. You exposed Helms-Burton all on your own over the Open University. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Very quickly, a couple of minutes from anyone. Gail, did you want to say anything in wrapping up?
I'd love to very, very quickly say 3 things. One, I think that Cuba's healthcare system, the tiered healthcare system, is the reason that Cuba's been so tremendously successful when it comes to fighting coronavirus. Family doctors, polyclinics, hospitals, medical institutions. That's the model. That's what we can learn. So when the minister talks about what Cuba's been able to teach the world, I look to that, and thank you, Cuba. Secondly, I wanted to just say that the Nobel Peace Prize is such a tremendous gesture that we need to all do what we can to lift up Cuba and the tremendous work that they've done in the area of health. And there's various campaigns. There's the pushes that are engaged to push for that to happen, including here in the United States. But just wanted to say that. And third, Rob, thank you so much for mentioning the Helms-Burton, because if there's anything that we collectively within the world, those of us who are friends of Cuba can do, it's to really work to dismantle Helms-Burton. That's at the root of all of this. We'll do what we do here in the U.S. and that's important, but I think a big part of our campaign has got to be really looking at what we can do to fight this extraterritorial nature of the blockade. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Gail. Bárbara, did you want to say any final words, just briefly?
Very brief. Some people say that the blockade is a pretext, and I answer, okay, remove it. If you think that the blockade is a pretext, remove it. And no, thank you very much, all of you, for this special moment.
Thank you, Bárbara. Fernando, the final word for you before we wrap up.
Well, thank you, Rob, for organizing this event. Thanks to Cuba Solidarity Campaign, and of course to our ambassador in London, to Jeremy Corbyn, and to you, and of course to our sister Gail, which we hope to see in Cuba as soon as conditions allow. As we hope to see you all. All right, thank you so much, Rob.
Well, thank you, Fernando, and please pass on all our best wishes on your 60th anniversary to all the colleagues at ICAP, to all of our friends and brothers, Gerardo, Rene, Antonio, Ramon, of course, and all the families of the 5 very good friends of ours, and of course to all the Cuban people. We are so proud and honoured to be in solidarity with your country, particularly at this time when we see the amazing work the Cuban medics are doing around the world. It really is a real testament to your desires to see a better world. A better world, as Gail said, is indeed possible, and it's a world that we can all work together to achieve. For those of you who are not already members of Cuba Solidarity Campaign, I must ask you to consider joining with us in the struggle for solidarity. You can affiliate your trade unions, your CLPs, and of course join yourselves. We have a number of campaigns online. We have an international petition calling for the temporary lifting of the blockade in this time of world pandemic to allow Cuba to battle coronavirus at home and abroad. And that's been signed by nearly 20,000 people. You can add your name to that petition online. We've raised over £30,000 for the Cuban Health Service to help them in their battle against coronavirus, and you can still contribute to that appeal. In the next few weeks, we have further meetings. We have one on the 60th anniversary of the Federation of Cuban Women. Again, someone's got their mic on, Bárbara. Can you turn it off? Mute. So we have a meeting of the Federation of Cuban Women on their 60th anniversary, and you'd all be very welcome to join us in that meeting. But the main thing I would say, and the addresses will come up at the end of this meeting, do keep in touch. Join the campaign, sign on to our Facebook, Twitter, and our website, because all the information is there, and we need your support to help in the struggle to defeat the blockade, to defend Cuba against the ongoing attacks from the blockade and from the aggressions that are coming out right now in the US Congress against the Cuban medical internationalism. We do need your support. You can make a difference, and together we can show solidarity with Cuba and make sure that together we can build a better world. Thank you to all our speakers, Jeremy Corbyn, to Gail Walker, to the Cuban ambassador, Bárbara Montalvo, and of course to our special guest, Fernando González. Thank you all for joining with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.